Okay, so let's do a demo and take a look at Azure and Microsoft 365 Secure Access. All right, so let's go over here. We'll go into the Office 365 portal as my tenant admin, and of course we'll come over here to the active users, and we'll see down here sampler, right? The admin account I'm logged in with. So this guy is pretty much the guy to set up the tenant. So his licensing is pretty much a Microsoft 365 license. Add the Defender for Endpoint for his devices. And of course the difference between like Microsoft 365 and the Office 365 is if I'm using Office 365, then I'm going to assign him the EMS license, as where the Microsoft 365 E5 license encompasses Office and Endpoint Management. But then also I have the Defender subscription, the trial here. And I'm logged in as administrator. I'm actually accessing the portal based off a conditional access policy, which limits me to only accessing based on maybe a specific IP address or a NAT address or behind a firewall. All right, so we'll show you that policy here. I'm going over to the Azure portal. So I'm logged in here. It's the same account. I'm going to go over here to my flyout menu down here to Azure Active Directory. And Azure AD all the way under Manage, there is a node down here called Security. Now, normally in Properties, when you set up your tenant, if you go into the Properties of your Azure Active Directory tenant, you'll see all the way at the bottom here we have Managing a Security Defaults. Now, usually this is set up to be yes, and usually you're asked a question if you're going to use MFA directly on your accounts, or maybe you're going to use Conditional Access instead. So I turn this off, and I'm using Conditional Access on my administrators. Administrators and users will be better protected from, common identity related attacks. If this is always on, then it's more or less enforcing MFA policy beyond you. And of course, I'm going to use Conditional Access. So over here under Security, you'll see up here under Protect, we have Conditional Access. Now I have two policies here, one based off a trusted location where my administrators are only be able to log in from, and then later as my users log in, enforcing enrollment against those devices using Endpoint Management. So if we look at the trusted location policy, we'll see again giving it a name and then specifying certain users here, which would be my administrators. So down here, Jason and Sam, right, my admin accounts, I want to make sure that they're protected and can only access all cloud apps. So what I did is here I pretty much made sure that all cloud access is at a secure location. So the conditions I set up for this account would be over here based off location. Now there's the user and sign-in risk based off identity protection if I only was worried about the user, but this is I'm more or less worried about the location where these users are logging in from. So it could also be device platform where you see we might have the devices. This would be better for enforcing enrollment against these devices if you're worried about compliance. But essentially, again, I set up my trusted location here, where I'm saying this policy pretty much applies to any location. So what this really is, if you log in from any location, the access will be blocked in case you're in a trusted location. So over here, I put in my on-prem environment, and behind this again is my router. I'm pretty much behind network address translation or a NAT device. So that's my trust location. So again, if I'm anywhere else, the access would be blocked. So these users getting to these apps, in this instance, any cloud access has to be, again, a secure location, or else down here you see granting would be blocked access. So that's pretty much how I set up this policy. Now, one of the things you can do here to test policy, and there's a link out there on Microsoft about this. Let me get over here for a second. Is yes, you might see I have the Tor Browser on my desktop. The Tor Browser essentially was developed by the military. Essentially, it's what some people might consider the dark net. But you can download the Tor Browser, and it does what they call anonymous relay. So it'll bring up the browser, and of course we'll go up here and go in to the portal. And so let me get the portal in here. Right, so you'll see it'll spin like any other browser, but essentially what it's doing, anonymous relay off most of the other countries. So when this browser comes up, you'll see under the lockbox, you'll see where it's actually bouncing off Latvia, France, and Germany. So it makes this request look like it's coming from an external. So this allows me to test my policy. So here again, I'll log in as the same account admin. So let's say somebody else got their hands on my account, or just seeing this atypical location where somebody's logging in, 5 minutes behind my login. So they hit the website, and of course it should come up and then block that access. So here you go. So you cannot access this right now. Your sign-in was successful but does not meet the criteria to access this resource based off my conditional access policy. So this again should create logging now within Azure AD, which if we're latching into alerting, we might also span over other dashboards like Sentinel or even Cloud Security. So again, this is represented of me again only being able to access based off this secure location. So what I did, to kind of set that up is there's a site out there like What's My IP. So I go to this site called What's My IP Address. It'll give me my IP address. So I'm behind this IP address. So I take this IP address and I bring it into that policy. So over here again, if we go back on conditional access and we go actually over here under the conditional access policy, you see there's a node called named location. So again, I go in and add this name location. And when I add this name location in, I'll just put in the IP address with a /32 single IP and then mark it as a trusted location. So the policy applies to any location except this location, which would be allowed. Everything else would be blocked. And that's how that policy works. All right. So as you see, I'm pretty much logged into the portal. And so from this access, any other access point, I'll be pretty much denied. So we're setting up now JSON. So here we have JSON. And JSON's licensing here is set up to be EMS license, so enrollment of his devices, also tracking those devices through Defender for Endpoint, and Office 365 just a standard license. Of course, down here we can see all the products that would be involved with JSON's licensing, like the premium services, rights management for classification of data. We can also see here, based off premium standard services, and then looking at Defender. Right, so we also have the multi-factor authentication, cloud app security. Also inside of here, we look at things like Defender for Identity or Defender for Endpoint. So JSON's going to be using some of the same policy based off conditional access. Based off his account over here is we had him in conditional access right based off his role. So you can see that JSON holds some roles here. And then the policy right that's going to let him have to access all 365 by a conditional access policy. Let's go over here to Azure Active Directory. We'll go in and look at our conditional access policy, and we're going to enforce anybody that comes in with a device now, right, to enroll those devices. So we'll look at this conditional access policy. Okay, so these users here, which you'll see a list down here is Jason plus these other users, are going to try to just access Office 365. And so you can actually come up and click on this, and you'll see a lot of applications here that Azure offers, mostly software as a service, anything we bring in based on software as a service. So the other one I selected everything. This I'm making more specific to Office 365. So when those users access this application based off this condition, and here this condition set up to look at the devices. So I'm saying pretty much if Jason logs into any device, all right, we're going to say that he's going to access based off granting this policy down here. So we're looking at saying requiring multi-factor authentication or requiring device to be marked as compliant. So we're saying if the device is not compliant, then it has to be enrolled. So we're looking at that policy to be pretty much in effect. So now Jason's computer has to be at a secure location, but also if it's not enrolled, it'll force him to enroll that computer with his licensing. All right, so let's look here and see if I'll close out of the admin session. And we'll try to come up here like Bull's logging in to a device that's not enrolled. All right, so I'll bring up another private window. We'll go out here to the portal. All right, we'll log in as Jason. With his password. And of course, Jason's getting an MFA challenge. All right, so we'll put this code in here that we just got. So here's his verification. Now again, if Jason got a MFA that was not him, like in other words, if somebody had tried to log in as him and it wasn't him and he gets an MFA challenge, he should be able to report that as fraud. But here we can see again, the device that Jason's logging into, right, is not enrolled. So this is more or less giving him, a notification that the application contains sensitive information and can only be accessed on devices or client applications that meet Woodworks management policy. So in this instance, Jason's logging in from the right location, but the device is not enrolled. So he'll have to now enroll his device. All right, so I'm going to close out this session, and I brought up a virtual machine over here that I more or less enrolled as Jason. So as we go into Jason, most Jason would use the same set of credentials now for everything. So he would be directed to go down to his settings, the gear icon, and then go into the Accounts tab, go over to his Access Worker School in Windows 10, and then we'd go in here to connect. When he connects, he'll be using either in the registration, which is good for password authentication, which would be this, or the other option would be the Azure AD join, or to join to an Active Directory on-premise. So he pretty much went through and joined to Azure AD, and then his device starts synchronizing up to the cloud services. So here he could click on info, and then you would see the policy coming down where the management server and device sync status is pretty much about 5 minutes out from the last time it's synchronized down here. So this would show again that Jason's device is synchronized. Now back up on the server side, we'd go into the Office 365 portal, and here we could see active devices, and here would be his bring your own device for Jason, and we can see pretty much just enrolled here currently. So Office 365 offers minimum MDM management. You can click on this device and do a factory reset, or maybe deal with password or PIN management. Very limited, no real compliance. So registration here, but then over in Active Directory or Azure AD, we'd also come in and we could see down here the device. And of course now it's actually enrolled, so this bring your own device here for Azure AD join has been done by Jason. You can see it come up to compliance, and this would now comply to our conditional access policy as a compliant device to access Office 365. So to further that, other than just the device enrollment, obviously he had an EMS license. So the next tab over I have Endpoint Manager, which used to be Intune. And here again, now we can see the actual device coming in here is really enrolled. So you're going to have an iOS and a Windows, which that would be Jason's device. Under all devices, we see again Jason's device as coming in here as compliant and now meeting our conditional access policy. So you can click on it, and of course you can see we can retire it, wipe it, we can remove it, but anything we could synchronize policy down to device. So if we change policy, we can synchronize that policy down to device pretty quickly. And of course we have some, inventory, but essentially the first thing after enrollment would be compliance. So here I have some built-in compliance policies, but I did create another compliance policy, mostly looking for Defender to be turned on, the firewall, antivirus, make sure Defender's at the latest and current version. Taking this then a step further would be accessing or adding on our Defender for Endpoint. So here again, I show you going into the security portal, security.microsoft.com, where I enabled the Defender trial. So down here, if we enable that, we'll see all the way in the lower left, the settings. And then, of course, endpoints would show up in here now. We'd see Microsoft 365 Defender for our regular trial, but then adding a Defender for Endpoint. So we go into endpoints, and of course, we have some settings in here now. And mostly getting those devices onboarded. So down here in the lower left, you'd have onboarding, where now we could download this package and install it against our devices to onboard these Windows 10 devices up here. And then run a detection test, which just would let us know that, again, creates a false anomaly that has the device show up here in inventory. And then, of course, you can see where I ran that script against this first client, which puts that at risk level so we can at least see our policies are running. And, of course, here's the device that Jason just enrolled. So we can see that here coming up pretty quickly. And of course, if any anomalies now happen to this, right, he's onboarded for Defender Endpoint, we can actually pick up those alerts then also. So just through these two layers alone, through identity and device management, we can see coming back to Azure Active Directory portal. I'll go back over here to Azure AD, and then again come down here to my security. So again, you'll see conditional access, identity protection, the security center for mostly resources running in Azure, but also identity for 365. And of course, here again, it gives you the secure score. So that would take you back. This link here would just show you how to use the secure score. But again, coming up with the recommendations where it's always making recommendations on the user for multi-factor authentication, pins on the device, encryption on data. So that would be, again, using these conditional access policies, which we talked about, name location, or on the top, go back to security and then identity protection. This policy, again, deals with user risk policy, so flagging these users that have a certain risk policy, and then here again, if that policy is matched and it's being a challenge, then we're forcing maybe the user to change password. And then signing risk, which might, again, look at certain anomalies, and also enforcing maybe requiring MFA to come in. So these policies you can see I turned off, but it's good to test them against your users. And if this policy is invoked, mostly it would be the MFA challenge, and it's tracking auditing. So here again, I probably did this a while ago, but actually, nope, that's the one that we just logged in wrong with Sam, And of course, you have to create that risk. So here we can see again, right, that one we just did earlier, where Sam's account came up, right, based off the conditional access policy not being matched. Yeah, so risky sign-ins, and then any risk detections in the system. We're here again, some of these other ones that we had, and let's see, that would be, yeah, pretty much these up here. Yeah, there's the browser, the Tor browser, where you can see it came in from different locations. So there we go, anonymous IP addresses. So one other thing we can look at here, if we go back up to security, is the authentication methods. So again, if you click on much links, they would give you through the documentation. But let's go back here. If we go back to, yep, over here under Manages Authentication Methods. So a lot of documentation you can read up on, but based off self-service, you can see that they can use passwordless Microsoft Authenticator app. There's FIDO keys. There's also now temporary access pass we can give people to come into the system. These, again, are mostly based off even password protection, so I can actually go into these areas, and then down here I actually set up certain users to use them. So we have different other methods, and then password protection area is mostly lockout, so if people log in too many times badly, right, lockout threshold, maybe 10 minutes here of lockout time, duration, yep, so that's actually the amount of time. So they have these little information icons you're going to hover over to get more information. That one, again, is based on how many failed sign-ins. So it tends pretty high. Let's say they fail to log in correctly 3 times. They may be locked out for 60 seconds or a minute, or depending on how much time you want them. There's also ability, right, to maybe ban certain password being used, and then, right, password protection for Active Directory on-premise. We have the password authentication, again, giving us some of those same services on-premise we have in the cloud. If we go back here again, back to security, cancel out those settings, we don't want to use them. There's also down here at the MFA. So as MFA gets used, like I said, based off the atypical location where somebody's logging in and we see that login again, and if you ever get a challenge that you didn't initiate, that you'll be able to report it as fraud. So here again, if somebody logs in MFA too many times bad, we can see we have denials on that, how many minutes they locked out, and then maybe just blocking users and putting them under investigation, where if you do add a user in here and block them, they can be blocked anywhere up to 90 days. So you can actually bring these users in, and then of course over here you can see the action where you may be able to unblock them also if they're after investigation. But the big thing here is, again, if somebody gets a fraud, an MFA that's not theirs, right, allowing users to submit those fraud alerts. Thing is, again, maybe automatically blocking that user because it could be a breach, and we don't want to take any chances. So this could block that user right away, which might show up in a blocked user here. And just based off anybody trying to hack against your account, or somebody being notified, right? Maybe the security admin should be, email put in here so that somebody's being notified if these actions are taken. Other things we talked about here, going up to the flyout menu, we can look for a service called PIM, Privileged Identity Management. Right, so we do have the identity management side. This one, again, is mostly where we're looking at either my roles, as I'm an admin, I'm not eligible, I'm an active assignment. Right, so here I'm as a global admin, I'm carrying this role all the time. So in other words, I might want to not do that. I might want to make my role eligible, and then go in and elevate permissions back when I actually need the role. So over here we have some people set up for this. We can come down and look at all the Active Directory roles. And inside of here we'd be able to manage these roles. And of course these would be all the roles in the system. Right? You can scroll and there's a lot of roles. Up here we can maybe toggle back on some, like just look for some global. There's global administrator. So again, I went out and added an assignment up here and made Patty and Mike here eligible. So that means when they need this permission, they usually rock around as a user, no role assigned. Then they come into this portal, they'd go to my role, either ask for approval or elevate that permission back based on MFA challenge. And of course then they can carry that role for maybe half an hour, an hour or so, reset a password, create a user, whatever they need to do. Then after that time is up, they're back to a standard user. Of course, active assignments are always assigned, so over here you can see it's permanent, so I'm carrying that role all the time. In most instances, you might have one at least permanent, and other ones may be eligible. And of course right now it's permanent, a role assignment, but they don't have it until they actually elevate. And you can actually come over here and remove that policy. But then down here again, each of these roles, as you go into them, I would have policy behind it, whether again the role needs approval or not approval, or when you do an MFA challenge, when you actually elevate the role. So one of the things we have in here, if we go back to Azure Active Directory, is just the application layer itself. So inside of here we'd have the enterprise apps. And if you're a tenant, you'll see that again you have like Exchange Online, right? All the applications in here. So if you can click on the application here, this is within Azure itself, right? We can have, provisioning user access, or right here you can actually even set up conditional access without, going through the other links. Right? Each application might have its own conditional access policy. So again, that would always be like a loop right back to, again, setting up these policies. Here again, you can see my trusted location policy. So as this application is involved in that conditional access policy already, you'll see that one pretty much comes up. But this again, we can see enterprise applications, and this would be software as a service within Azure. You can go up to the application gallery, pick up an application here, like these like third-party apps. Like up here, you may know what you want, like maybe Salesforce. Let's see, you can look maybe for Salesforce. Of course, it'd be all the applications over here. Salesforce, we can click on the app. And then all the apps, mostly thousands of apps up here, would have step-by-step guides of how to set this application up within the browser. So software as a service within the browser. Of course, that would show up in the My Apps portal in Azure, or again, right in the Office portal that you log into where all the applications will be assigned. Here again, you can see where this be setting up, going into Salesforce subscription, and then cross-federating perhaps with Salesforce and Azure using certificates, which would be a lot more, secure login through SAML. So down here again, they would show you how to download certificates from Salesforce, and then go over to Azure, download certificates, and just cross-federate, right, certificate access within the browser, making that login a lot more secure. So literally thousands of applications up in the software as a service gallery. Of course, if you're dealing with application deployment through Intune, then of course over here, right, we'd have its app policies where we can, deploy obviously apps to Windows, iOS, and Android devices enrolled. But then down here, they'd have a layer of protection based off app protection policy. These two are usually based on what they call MAM or WIP, Mobile Application Management Policy, protecting corporate data on the corporate device. And, obviously you can copy personal data in, but you should not be able to, copy corporate data out to the personal device or any personal areas. And that really enrolls, governance of our, data areas, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, and pretty much Exchange. But these, again, we'd have WIP policy for 10. And, of course, that, again, would be tagging things as corporate data, so it stays on the corporate side, not being able to move to any personal side. And the same thing, again, would be true for the MAM policy in iOS if you're enrolling those devices. We'd come in here and we'd see, right, where we'd have sanctioned apps. In other words, we could cut, copy, and paste data back and forth between Office apps or any other applications we bring in. But based on policy, right, policy managed apps, be able to cut, copy, paste data back and forth. But we would block, right, we would block being able to save copies of org data maybe down to the device. So this would give you, that again, an extra layer of enforcement at the application layer. Therefore, again, most data being accessed through the application layer, we protect the application layer and then make sure maybe that the data is secure also then. I mean, obviously, if the data is encrypted or meets a certain pattern, we might be able to classify and label that data so it's encrypted before anybody accesses it. So that might bring in, again, access to your governance areas based off SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. So if we go back over here to the security portal, right where Defender shows up here again, you'll see that we have that secure score because it's a security portal for 365. So again, making requirements over MFA, application recommendations, mostly down here, right, gaining points, and then hopefully seeing your score go up over time as we implement these policies. So it's going to recommend all kinds of improvement actions. All right, so again, the list is ever growing, but as we implement these actions, or maybe ignore them because they don't apply. See up here, you might say risk accepted or go into that specific recommendation. They'll give you guidance of how to implement that recommendation. Then, of course, as you further the data journey over here in Office 365, we come down here and we have these, two portals, security portal and compliance portal. So if we look at the security portal, which sometimes, again, might default to the protection portal, but again, we can see, takes you pretty much right back here, where again, you have secure score, and of course, if you had any campaigns, right, automatic response coming on you, then we might be able to take advantage of the hunting up here with advanced hunting. And of course, we'd see the campaigns and things, getting started based off how we might query against the information. Threat analytics, device inventory, right, vulnerability management, a lot of things here based off the security side of the house. Also inside of here, you have evaluation tutorials. So these are where you might have those attack simulators where you can have a lot of things running against your client and then do certain false anomalies against your client, see if they take the bait, and then gives them more of a learning curve, right? To look for things where they may not be savvy right now, but after this training campaign, false positives against them, hopefully they get more savvy about what to do in these instances. So this is a really nice area with attack simulation. So that would also launch, tutorials and more learning in this area. Of course, things that might be happening to our actual mail clients, like investigation, explore, submissions, these again are mostly based off the automated investigation response. So if we have phishing attempts or spoofing attempts or malware attempts at us, and we're part of that Microsoft cybercrime unit, which our names come up here, then we should be able to see this here. And of course, we have a reports area, auditing, and then back to settings, based off, onboarding devices. If you look further into this, you go back to the admin portal, and then of course you have the compliance area. Compliance mostly looks at the governance. So in this instance, we'd come in here and we'd see data classification. So this might bring in instances where either we're going to have, built-in classifiers where it's like credit card information, social security information. And if we see that type of data, we might classify it automatically or be prompted to manually classify it. Or we might again have trainable classifiers or sensitivity labels that we might create to actually look for information. So there are, trainable classifiers, but mostly a lot of these policies within the system are built off maybe these default templates. Like up here again, you can create your own sensitive info type, but these be looking for like credit cards, or maybe you're in a specific compliance area like FINRA or Sarbanes-Oxley, healthcare, finance, or again creating custom labels to classify your own data. Down here again, we can use these labels in things like data loss prevention. So DLP policies that might help us again, look for certain like phone patterns. Like I created one here where I created my own label looking for a phone pattern. And if that data shows up in an email being sent, I should block that action. So DLP policies being set up here to again, look over Exchange email, SharePoint, OneDrive, or even Teams chat channels. This pattern shows up, again, it should be blocked from either being sent or being, again, obviously downloaded or even used. So again, there's a lot of things to look at when you're talking about security in Office 365 and Azure. So identity, multi-factor authentication, self-service, privileged identity management, and identity protection on the policy side. And of course, we talked about device management, compliance, enrollment, application layer with password protection or PINs, but accessing the data, thinking about governance within the data, and then coming in here, based off, securing your data within your company.